The Cost of a Clean Slate. A Hood Eloquence original. Where the streets meet the literature. The most dangerous woman in any room is the one who is already decided. Anonymous. Part 1. Clean Hands. The Architecture of a Quiet Life. Chapter 1. What Peace Costs. The candle wax dripped in long, clean lines down the side of the pillar mold, and Sienna Davis watched it the way she watched most things now, with patience, with intention, with the kind of stillness that had taken her the better part of 2 years to cultivate. The studio smelled of bergamot and cedar, of warm beeswax and dried lavender, and it was the smell of a life she had built with her own 2 hands. Not inherited. Not borrowed. Not stolen. Built. Outside the front window, Hallow Creek moved the way small Texas towns always moved in the late afternoon, slow, golden, unbothered. Mrs. Paula Hicks from the bakery next door waved as she passed, her arms full of a Saturday arrangement she'd been working on for the Leigh's anniversary dinner. Sienna raised 2 fingers in response, the gesture small but genuine. That was the thing about Hallow Creek. It asked very little of her. She had come here 3 years ago in a 12-year-old Civic with 2 duffel bags and $4,000 in cash folded into the lining of an old sleeping bag. She had chosen the town the way she chose everything now, with logic, not feeling. Population under 8,000. No direct highway access. Not a destination. Not a place people came through. A place people stayed. She had rented the building on Margin Street for $300 a month from a man named John Branch who'd bought it at auction and didn't know what to do with it. She'd sanded the floors herself. Painted the walls the color of raw cream. Hung Edison bulbs low over the work table. The sign above the door read Still, the name she'd chosen because it meant 2 things at once, and she had always had a poet's affection for the weight a single word could carry. Still. As in quiet. As in, nevertheless. As in, she was here. She was here. She was still. The afternoon light was softening toward copper when the bell above the door chimed. Hey, Sienna. It was Ross Williams, the deputy sheriff, a broad man with the easy walk of someone who had never once felt threatened in his own body. He removed his hat as he stepped inside, which she'd always appreciated. You doing the market this Saturday? Planning on it, she said. I've got a new line. Smoke-cured tapers. Thomas over at the inn asked me to do a batch for his private dining room. Ross nodded, turning his hat slowly in his hands. You hear about the food truck permit situation? Dave Martin's giving the board fits again. Dave Martin gives everyone fits, Sienna said without looking up. Ross laughed. It was a real laugh. The kind that reached his eyes. Fair enough. You need anything? I'm good, she said. And then, because it was true and because she had learned to say true things when she felt them, I really am. He nodded once more, replaced his hat, and let the door close gently behind him. Sienna stood alone in the amber studio and let herself feel it. The fullness of an ordinary Tuesday. The weight of a life that belonged to no one but her. She would not have it for long. Chapter 2. Before the Quiet. She had not always been Sienna Davis of Hallow Creek, Texas, artisan chandler and quiet fixture of the Saturday market. She had been Sienna Brown of East Atlanta, and before that she had been something harder to name, someone in the space between daughter and soldier, between woman and resource, between love and the worst kind of leverage. She had met Deonte when she was 22. He had not been dangerous then. Or rather, he had been dangerous in the way that she found thrilling at 22, which meant she had not recognized the difference between danger and electricity, between a man who made her feel alive and a man who required her near death to sustain himself. He was beautiful. That was where it always started with men like Deonte, their beauty. He was tall and dark and built like a question you couldn't stop asking, with a voice that settled low in the chest and eyes that stayed on you long past the point of casual. He ran a logistics operation out of 2 warehouses on the south side of the city, and for a long time Sienna told herself it was just business. Then she told herself it was survivable. Then she told herself it was the life she deserved. She had been wrong on all 3 counts. She met his lieutenants, Jaquan Ford, who never smiled, Dean Hickory, who smiled too much, and a woman who went only by Joe, who had cold gray eyes and a talent for mathematics that she used in service of cash flows that never touched a bank. She learned their rhythms. She learned the language. Not because Deonte taught her, but because Sienna had always been a student of rooms, of patterns, of the unspoken architecture beneath every spoken arrangement. She was not a runner. She was not a courier. She was the one who understood structure. Who saw 3 steps ahead. Who could read a situation the way other people read weather. That was what Deonte had loved in her. That was also what had made her the most dangerous person in every room he brought her into. He just hadn't understood it yet. The blood had started slowly. One situation that required a hard decision. Then another. Then the decisions started arriving before the situations did, and Sienna began to understand that she was no longer reacting. She was engineering. That was the moment she decided to leave. Not when she was scared. Not when she was threatened. Not when some man with a gun told her to run. She left when she looked in the mirror one morning and did not recognize the calculus behind her own eyes. When she realized that the woman she was becoming was one she had not chosen and might not be able to unchoose if she waited any longer. She spent 8 months planning it. She moved money in increments so small they registered as rounding errors. She built a paper trail that ended in Memphis and then vanished. She let Deonte believe she was softening, let him believe she was overwhelmed, let him believe she needed him more than she ever had. And then she was gone. Not running. Departing. There is a difference. Chapter 3. A visitor with no appointment. It was a Wednesday when he walked in. She knew it was a Wednesday because she always poured the pillar candles on Wednesdays. It was the rhythm of her week, the steady pulse beneath everything else. The studio was warm. Ella Fitzgerald was low on the Bluetooth speaker in the corner. Sienna had her hair wrapped in a rust-colored linen scarf, and she was wearing an apron that smelled of vanilla and smoke, and she was, by any reasonable measure, happy. The bell above the door chimed. She said, without turning, "We're not technically open until noon, but I've got a few things on the counter if you." Then she turned. Deonte Harrison stood in the doorway of her studio the way he stood everywhere, like the space had been waiting for him. Like he had calculated exactly how much of it he intended to fill. He was dressed simply, dark jeans, a clean white shirt, a jacket the color of late November. He had cut his hair close since she'd last seen him, and there were lines at the corners of his eyes that hadn't been there before. He looked at her the way she'd always hated him looking at her. Like she was both the answer and the question. Like she was a place he'd been trying to find his whole life and had only stopped looking for recently. Sienna set down the pouring pitcher very slowly. She did not run. She did not scream. She did not reach for the phone or the blade she kept beneath the counter in a leather sheath that had been there since her 3rd week in Hallow Creek. She said, "How?" Not a question. She already knew. There were only so many threads left to pull. "Joe," he said. "Of course." Joe with her cold gray eyes and her relentless mathematics. "You need to leave," Sienna said. "I know." He stepped inside anyway. "But you need to hear me first. Deonte, I'm not here to bring you back." He stopped 6 feet from her, far enough that she clocked it as intentional. He knew she was calculating distance. He had always known. "I'm here because there are people who think you are the answer to a problem I cannot solve, and I need you to understand what that means before they stop sending me and start sending someone else." The studio was very quiet. Ella had reached the end of a song. The wax in the pitcher was beginning to skin over. Sienna looked at the man who had occupied the most consequential years of her life, and she felt something she had not expected to feel. She felt clear. "Sit down," she said. "Don't touch anything." He sat. Part 2. The weight she carried. Every debt has an architect. Chapter 4. The shape of the debt. She made him tea because her hands needed something to do and because it placed her at the counter with her back to him, which meant she could think without his eyes on her face. He explained it methodically, the way she'd taught him to explain things back when she was still the one building the frameworks. There was a man named David Leigh, though she'd known him as Leigh, which was how he preferred it, who had been a mid-level creditor in Deonte's operation during the last year she was present. Leigh had loaned Deonte capital for an expansion that never materialized. The expansion had not materialized, in large part, because Sienna had quietly ensured it wouldn't. She had seen it for what it was, a trap dressed as an opportunity, and she had begun dismantling it 6 weeks before she left. She had not known that Leigh would interpret the collapse as fraud. She had not known that Leigh would spend 3 years nursing that interpretation into a conviction. She had not known that Leigh had hired a man named Martin, a former investigator out of Houston who spent his retirement pulling threads, and that Martin had pulled enough of them to reach a name. Her name. In his accounting of events, Sienna Davis, née Brown, had deliberately sabotaged a capital agreement, extracted herself from the consequences, and left Deonte holding a debt that was not, in Leigh's view, entirely Deonte's to carry. "He wants $200,000, Deonte said. Sienna turned around. "He thinks I have $200,000. He knows you moved money before you left. He knows the amounts." Deonte's voice was steady, but she could see his jaw working. "Joe's numbers were always clean, Sienna. But not clean enough, apparently." She looked at him for a long moment. "How much of that do you believe?" He was quiet for 3 seconds. "I believe you were smarter than anyone in any room you ever walked into. I believe you made decisions when you left. I don't believe you owe Leigh Davis anything." He paused. "But what I believe doesn't move the problem." "No," she agreed. "It doesn't." She set his tea in front of him. She did not pour one for herself. "How much time do I have before he sends someone who isn't you?" 2 weeks. Maybe 3. He looked at the tea, then at her. "There's something else. There's always something else. Leigh has a partner. Someone who's been handling the investigative side. Someone who knows what you look like now." He reached into his jacket and placed a photograph on the counter between them. "Her name is Jackie Hicks. She's been in Hallow Creek for 6 days. The woman in the photograph was standing outside still. She had her phone raised. She was looking directly at the lens of whatever camera had captured her, and she was smiling slightly, the smile of someone who was very good at their work and knew it. Sienna looked at the photograph for a long time. Then she picked it up. Where's she staying? The Inn on Calvert. Room 8. Sienna nodded once. Thank you for bringing this yourself. Sienna. I mean it. Thank you. She folded the photograph in half and slid it into the pocket of her apron. You should go. Don't come back here. If I need to reach you, I'll find a way. He looked at her with that expression she remembered, that specific weight in his eyes, the one that had always cost her something. Are you going to run? She turned back to the counter. Picked up the pouring pitcher. Checked the temperature of the wax. No, she said. I'm done running. Chapter 5. Jackie Hicks at breakfast. The Inn on Calvert Street served breakfast from 7 to 10, and Sienna was there at 7:15 with a small basket of her candles wrapped in craft paper and tied with a length of crimson twine. Thomas Harrison, the proprietor, no relation to Deonte, a kind man with a white beard and a fondness for her honey amber votives, met her at the door with coffee already poured. Morning, Sienna. New inventory. Sample batch for the dining room. Thomas, you mentioned you had a guest staying a few extra days. I wanted to ask about leaving something in the room, if you think she'd appreciate it. Thomas's face opened up. He was, at his heart, a man who loved the idea of a gesture. Room 8. Lovely woman, quiet. Checks out Friday, she said. Go on up, housekeeping hasn't come through yet, but she's already downstairs. She thanked him. She did not go upstairs. She found a table near the window, ordered eggs she didn't intend to eat, and waited. Jackie Hicks arrived at the breakfast room at 7:42. She was smaller in person than in the photograph, compact, with efficient movements and a practiced expressionlessness that Sienna recognized immediately as professional. She wore simple clothing. She sat facing the door. She ordered black coffee. She was good. But she had not expected to be watched. Sienna watched her for 19 minutes. She noted the way Jackie's eyes moved across the room. The way she held her phone angled down, never flat. The way she briefly tensed when a tall man came in from the parking lot before relaxing when he spoke to Thomas by name. Sienna left before Jackie finished her coffee. She had everything she needed. Chapter 6. The Geometry of Trust. She called Ross Williams from the alley behind the studio. I have a situation, she said when he answered. I need to know what I'm working with before it becomes your situation. He was quiet for a moment. Then you in trouble, Sienna? I'm managing trouble, she said. That's different. You sure about that difference? Ross. I need to know if anyone has been making inquiries about me. County record level. Property records. Any out-of-state plates on any vehicle parked on Margin Street in the past week. She could hear him shift his weight. She had given him enough over 3 years, her steadiness, her presence, the easy integrity of her daily life, that he trusted her without fully understanding why. That trust had been cultivated deliberately and genuinely at the same time. Those two things were not mutually exclusive. That was something she had learned long before Hallow Creek. Give me an hour, he said. Thank you. Sienna. His voice was careful. Is someone going to get hurt? She looked at the back wall of the alley, where someone had painted a mural years ago that had faded to suggestion. She could make out a bird, or something like one. Wings spread. Going somewhere. Not if I can help it, she said. It was the most honest thing she'd said in 3 years. Part 3. The Architect's Blueprint. She did not leave because she was afraid. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Chapter 7. What Sienna Knows. Here is what David Leigh did not understand about Sienna Davis. She had not moved $200,000. She had moved $67,000 in increments over 18 months into 3 accounts that had since been closed, laundered through a series of cash-heavy transactions, and converted into the physical assets of her business and the liquid savings she kept in a standard account at a Hallow Creek credit union under her real name. She had done this not because she intended to hide it forever, but because she had understood, in the cold, clear way she understood most things, that the day might come when someone followed a financial trail and found it end in mud, and that the experience of reaching a dead end would be demoralizing enough to send them elsewhere. What she had not anticipated was Leigh. His particular brand of wounded pride was rarer than greed. Greed had a price. Pride was harder to negotiate, but not impossible. She spread her notes across the work table after closing time and looked at what she had. She was good at this, the arrangement of information into pattern, the way a weaver looks at loose threads and sees the finished cloth. She had a photograph of Jackie Hicks. She had Deonte's account of Leigh's position. She had Ross's information, which had arrived via text that afternoon, a rental car registered to a company called Branch and Leigh Consulting, a shell she recognized as the kind of name that meant it was not a coincidence. She had Jaquan Ford's number from memory. She had Dean Hickory's number from the same memory. She had Joe's number from a place she didn't like to think about, an emergency protocol she'd established before she left, a dead drop of contact information she'd never expected to use. She picked up her phone. She set it down. She walked to the window and looked at Margin Street in the dark, the street lamps orange and steady, the bakery dark, the hardware store's awning moving slightly in the November wind. She thought about peace. About the price of it. About whether a thing you purchased with someone else's suffering could ever really be called yours. Then she picked up the phone. She dialed Joe. Chapter 8. Joe. Joe answered on the second ring, which meant she'd been expecting it. Sienna Brown, she said. Her voice had not changed at all. Joe. Sienna sat on the edge of the work table. You sent him to me. Someone was going to send someone, Joe said. I made sure it was him. You can be angry about that. I'm not angry. She wasn't. I need to know the full scope of what Leigh has. Everything Martin gave him. A pause. The kind that meant calculation. Why would I know that? Because you've been watching this situation since before Deonte knew it existed. Because you know everything that moves through that network, Joe. You always did. That's why you're still there. Another pause. Shorter. Leigh has proof of the original capital agreement. He has transaction records that were pulled from a server that was supposed to have been wiped. He has a physical description that's accurate, a name that's 6 months old, and a photograph taken 3 days ago. By Jackie Hicks. By Jackie Hicks, Joe confirmed. Who, for what it's worth, is not a bad person. She's a contract investigator and she's doing a job. I know, Sienna said. That's why I'm not treating her like a threat. She's a variable. She looked at her notes. Leigh is the problem. Leigh, Joe said carefully, is a man who believes he was robbed. In his accounting, you are the thief. And what's your accounting, Joe? The longest pause yet. Outside, a car passed on Margin Street, its headlights sweeping across the ceiling of the studio in a long, slow arc. My accounting, Joe said finally, is that you saw a man about to walk into a deal that would have ended very badly for several people, including Deonte, and you dismantled it. And that Leigh was not harmed by that dismantling. He simply did not receive the return he expected on money. He had no business investing in the first place. And that the story he's telling himself, in which you are a criminal and he is a victim, is the story of a man who cannot tolerate the idea that he was outplayed by a woman who was never even supposed to be at the table. Sienna was quiet for a moment. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me. I gave you his number because you're the only person I have ever met who is capable of ending this without anyone dying. Don't make me regret the compliment. Does Deonte know you called me? He knows I know where you are. He doesn't know about the contact information. Keep it that way. She picked up a pencil and added a note to her papers. One more thing. That server that was supposed to be wiped. What about it? Who failed to wipe it? A beat. Then Joe said a name. Sienna wrote it down. Joe, she said. Take care of yourself. You too, Sienna Brown. She hung up. She stared at the name on the paper. She crossed it out and wrote something else beneath it because she had just thought of something better. Chapter 9. Between Wednesday and Thursday. She had told herself, in the years since Atlanta, that she was done with the particular feeling that preceded high-stakes work. The feeling was not fear. It was not excitement. It was a kind of deep, operational stillness, the way a room sounds before a performance begins, all that held breath. She had told herself she was done with it. She felt it anyway on Wednesday night as she prepared. She called John Branch and asked about the property records for the building that housed Branch and Leigh Consulting's rental vehicle account. Not because she needed legal information. Because she needed John Branch to know she'd looked, and for that to come up in some future conversation that she would not be present for. She wrote a letter to Ross Williams, sealed it, and placed it in the lockbox she kept behind the counter. The letter explained, in careful legal language, exactly what she knew about the situation and exactly what she intended to do about it. She addressed the outer envelope to a supervisor at the county sheriff's office and left instruction for it to be opened only if she did not check in by Friday morning. She was not planning to fail. But she planned for failure the way she planned for everything else, with the kind of detailed attention that made failure feel like a manageable contingency rather than an ending. She poured one last batch of candles. The dark amber votives that Thomas used in the dining room, the ones that threw warmth and shadow in equal measure. She worked in silence, watching the wax, letting her hands perform their practiced ritual. She thought about the girl she'd been at 22. The one who had confused electricity for safety, who had loved Deonte Harrison with the particular violence of a woman who had never been taught what love was supposed to cost. She thought about that girl with something close to tenderness. You got us here, she said softly to the girl, to the studio, to herself. I'll take it from here. Part 4. The trap she set. She built it in the language they already spoke. Chapter 10. Thursday morning, Jackie Hicks. She found Jackie Hicks at the market on Thursday morning and sat down beside her at the coffee stand. Jackie tensed immediately, not visibly, not to most people. But Sienna was not most people. I know who you are, Sienna said pleasantly, accepting a paper cup from the woman behind the cart. I know who hired you and what you were asked to find. I want you to know that I'm not going to make your job difficult. Jackie turned to look at her. Her face was professionally neutral. Ma'am. Sienna. Please. She took a sip of her coffee. I'm also not going to pretend I don't understand what I'm looking at. You're a contract investigator. You found what you were hired to find. What happens next is between me and David Leigh, and I want you to know that before you file your final report, because the shape of that report is going to matter quite a bit. Jackie said nothing. She was listening, which was the right thing to be doing. The man who hired you has a version of events that is incomplete in ways that would be very inconvenient for him if examined carefully by the right people, Sienna said. I'm going to give you a name you can verify independently, through county records, through federal filing history, through 2 separate civil suits from 2019 that are a matter of public record. She set a folded piece of paper on the counter between them. That name is the person who failed to wipe a server. That failure is the reason Martin found what he found. And that failure was not accidental. Jackie's eyes moved to the paper. She didn't touch it. I'm not asking you to lie, Sienna said. I'm not asking you to omit anything. I'm asking you to be complete. Because a complete report, in this case, tells a very different story than the one you were hired to find. She stood. She picked up her coffee. The paper's for you to keep or discard, she said. I leave that to your judgment. I think you've got good judgment. She looked at Jackie steadily. I hope you've been well paid. You're very skilled. She walked away without looking back. Behind her, after a long moment, she heard the sound of paper unfolding. Chapter 11. The call to Leigh. She called David Leigh at noon on Thursday from the studio, using a number she had not used since Atlanta. He answered on the 4th ring. She had expected him to take longer. This is Sienna, she said. I imagine you've been waiting for this call. She had thought about how he would receive her, with aggression, perhaps, or with the careful measured tone of a man who wanted to project control. What she got was silence, and then a long exhale, and then, you're bolder than I expected. Then you didn't do enough research, she said pleasantly. Mr. Leigh, I want to resolve this. I believe we can, and I believe we can do it in a way that benefits us both considerably more than the alternative. The alternative, he repeated. The alternative, she said, is that your investigator files a complete report. Complete meaning it includes not only what I did, but what you did. Specifically, the person on your payroll who deliberately failed to wipe a server, a person you instructed to leave a readable trail, because you wanted a case, and you needed the evidence to appear discovered rather than planted. A long silence. You can't prove that, he said. But the certainty was gone. I don't need to prove it, she said. I need it to be asked about. I need one federal civil investigator to start asking questions about Branch and Leigh Consulting and the paper trail leading back to 3 2019 judgments. I need exactly as much scrutiny applied to you as you've applied to me. She paused. Or none. I'm honestly flexible. What do you want? His voice had lost its architecture entirely. I want you to call your investigator and tell her the case is closed. I want Deonte Harrison to be informed that his debt to you has been settled in full through an arrangement that does not require his participation. I want Martin's files on me destroyed. And I want your word for whatever a man like you has left of it. That's a lot. It's nothing, she said. It's nothing compared to what I could ask for. And we both know that. Another long silence. She could hear him thinking. She had always been able to hear people think. The investigator, he said finally. She's already filed? She's deciding. Sienna looked at the candles drying on the rack above the counter. I'd imagine you have about 4 hours. He was quiet for another moment. Then, send me verification of what you have. On the server. I'll send it once you've called your investigator and once I've received confirmation from Deonte that the debt has been marked resolved. She paused. I'm not unreasonable, Mr. Leigh. I'm thorough. There's a difference. He said something under his breath that she didn't quite catch. Then fine. Thank you, she said, and she meant it in the specific way she meant things, not warmly, but precisely. Gratitude for the correct decision, delivered cleanly, without embellishment. She ended the call. She set the phone on the counter. The studio was warm and quiet and smelled of bergamot and cedar. She picked up a candle that had finished curing, one of the dark amber ones, a perfect cylinder, heavy and smooth, and she held it for a moment in both hands. Then she placed it on the shelf with the others. Part 5. What remains? The architecture of a quiet life rebuilt. Chapter 12. Deonte, one last time. He came back on Friday. She had expected it. Some men cannot leave a thing fully without touching it one more time, the way you press a bruise even after it stops hurting, to confirm the nature of the body's capacity for recovery. She was closing up when he knocked. The door was already locked. She looked at him through the glass for a moment, at this man who had been the weather of her 20s, the pressure system that had shaped the woman she was, and then she turned the bolt. Leigh called me, he said. He stayed on the threshold. He said the debt was cleared. It is. He wouldn't tell me how. He studied her. I didn't ask twice. That was wise, she said. He looked around the studio. At the candles ranked on the shelves, the work table with its measuring tools and wax-stained surface, the Edison bulbs casting their amber wash over everything. You built something real, he said. It came out quiet, the way things do when they are not intended to manipulate, when they are simply the truth that arrived uninvited. Yes, she said. Does it? He stopped. Started again. Is it enough? Is it what you needed it to be? She thought about that. She thought about peace, the real kind, the kind that had a texture, that required maintenance, that was not an absence of difficulty, but a particular quality of presence. She thought about Tuesday afternoons and Paula Hicks waving through the window, and the rhythm of wax and flame, and the way a good candle burns slow, and even gave the room back to itself. Yes, she said. It is. He nodded. He looked at her one more time, that look, the one that had always cost her something, and then he looked away, and the cost of it was less than she remembered. Perhaps she had already paid down the debt. Perhaps the interest had finally stopped compounding. Take care of yourself, Sienna. You too, Deonte. She watched him walk to a car she didn't recognize, parked half a block down Margin Street in the Friday evening light. She watched him until the car turned the corner and the street was just the street again, orange lamps and the bakery dark and the hardware store's faded awning. She locked the door. She turned off the lights one by one. She stood for a moment in the dark of her studio, surrounded by the invisible weight of everything she had made here, every candle cured and cooled and waiting to be lit in someone's home. Then she went upstairs to where she lived, and she put on music, and she made herself dinner, and she did not think about Atlanta, or Deonte, or Leigh, or Joe, or the particular arithmetic of survival. She thought about the market on Saturday, about the smoke-cured tapers for Thomas's dining room, about whether she wanted to try a new fragrance combination in the spring, something with black pepper and vetiver, warm and grounded and complicated. Something that smelled like someone who had arrived. Chapter 13. Saturday, the market. The market on Saturday was the best it had been all fall. She set up Still's booth at the corner of the square, the way she always did, the table draped in ivory linen, the candles arranged by fragrance family, the small hand-lettered cards describing each one in language that was neither pretentious nor plain. Dave Martin was there with his food truck and his familiar chaos. John Branch walked by with his wife, who bought the honey votives every single week without fail. Ross Williams came through in plain clothes with his daughter, a girl of about 7 who pressed her nose against the glass jars with an expression of profound concentration. She wants to know what this one smells like, Ross said, pointing to a tall pillar the color of dark mahogany. Sienna crouched down to be level with the girl. That one's called Ember. It smells like a fire that just went out, but the warm kind, not the scary kind. The kind where everyone's still sitting around it. The girl considered this with the seriousness it deserved. Then she nodded. We'll take it, Ross said, and he looked at Sienna over his daughter's head with something in his eyes that was not a question. He'd received her letter. He'd found it in the lockbox that morning when she'd stopped by to retrieve it, and she'd watched his face as he held it, unread, and then placed it carefully back in the envelope. You don't need to explain anything, he'd said. I know, she'd said. But I wanted you to know I would have. He'd nodded. That had been enough. The sun came down the square in long gold slides by early afternoon, turning everything the color of autumn doing its best work. Sienna stood behind her table and watched the town move around her, its rhythms and its frictions, its small kindnesses and smaller complaints, and she felt the particular fullness of a life that was genuinely, honestly hers. Not because nothing bad had ever happened in it. Not because she was a person nothing bad could reach. But because she had reached the other side of what she was capable of, looked at it clearly, made her accounting and chosen differently. Not away from herself, but toward the version of herself that did not require blood to feel powerful, that did not need to be the most dangerous person in the room in order to feel safe. She was still capable of it. She had proven that this week with a clarity that she would carry the way she carried everything now, quietly, completely, without apology. She was simply choosing not to live there. A woman stopped at the booth, a newcomer to town, by the look of her, someone passing through or possibly arriving. She picked up one of the amber votives and turned it slowly in both hands, the way people do when they're holding something they don't have language for yet. What's this one called? She asked. Sienna looked at it. At the clean amber wax, the perfect pour line, the wick centered and straight and ready. Still, she said. The woman smiled. I like that. Most people do, Sienna said. Once they know what it means. She sold out by 3 o'clock. She packed her table and her linen and her empty display jars into the back of her truck, and she drove down Margin Street with the windows down and the November air coming through cold and clean. She had work to do. A new batch to pour. A spring line to begin sketching. A life to continue building in the particular key she had chosen, not because it was the easiest key, but because it was the truest one she'd ever found. At the corner of Margin and Calvert, she stopped at the light and looked, for just a moment, at the inn. Room 8 was already empty. Jackie Hicks was gone. The light changed. Sienna drove. The end. The Cost of a Clean Slate. A Hood Eloquence original. Where the streets meet the literature. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and